I found arguably the worst kind of snapshotting that could possibly exist in a video game like this, which oddly enough is inspired by games that I played in the past like Diablo 2. For people coming from Diablo 2, you might recognize the death web swap technique that I'm about to explain to you here. But for people who've never played Diablo 2, in that game, you could have two weapon swaps. You could wear all of your original gear, and you could use one weapon, trigger an effect, and then swap to a different type of weapon. For things that would do poison damage over time in a large cloud, like a Plague Javazon, you could throw your javelin, and then swap over to a bunch of gear that would reduce the resistances of monsters to poison damage to cheat out a ton of extra damage. This was very prevalent in, like, PvP, where a rabies druid would attack you and then swap over to Death's Web, and then basically kill everybody by reducing all the resistances down to -100, doubling the damage that you would do. But I'm getting a little bit too nitty gritty here. I've found something that luckily cannot be abused in something like the Pit, but can be abused in things like Echo of Lilith, as well as tormented bosses, level 200 versions of bosses that drop 5 times the loot for 3 times the amount of materials. And here's my disclaimer right up top, because I don't want anybody to think that I'm clickbaiting here, because what I'm about to show you isn't going to seem that fantastic. It's not going to seem that ridiculous, but it is something that is broken in the game, probably shouldn't work like this, and almost certainly currently has some type of application outside of the Necromancer. Now, luckily, right now, for me and you watching this video, if all you play is this MacroBioBoi, you don't necessarily have to worry about this, because I haven't found a way to break it yet. But let me just highlight what I'm talking about here. The purpose of what you're about to see here is to prove the fact that putting on equipment after you do something can alter the thing that you did previously. Let me go ahead and show you the exact example that we're talking about. I currently have no points in Hued Flesh. Hued Flesh says lucky hit chance to be able to generate a corpse, and it's a lucky hit ability, which means that typically speaking, skills are needed to be applied to the target for this to happen. Now, luckily for us as necromancers, we have the Black River. The Black River says that we gain ranks of Hued Flesh, mine is currently Masterworked, so I gain 3 ranks of Hued Flesh, and if I was to put this on and go look at my stat page for the skill tree real quick, you'd see that I have a 12% chance of generating a corpse based off of lucky hit. Now, if I were to take this 24% chance, so again, doubled against a boss here, and I were to look at my bonus lucky hit chance, I have 52% bonus lucky hit chance. That means I have a whopping 38% chance of triggering this off of Corpse Explosion. 38% chance multiplied by 24% chance, roughly a quarter of that. And we should basically expect to proc a corpse sometime around 9% of the time. Now, that doesn't sound altogether that impressive, but what if I told you that I could not use Black River at all, have 0 ranks in Hued Flesh, and what if I were to cast Corpse Explosion? What do you expect to happen here? You definitely don't expect me to generate a corpse, right? Well, let's go ahead and watch. It's going to be a very awkward 6-second stare. Also, all of this is just lead up to the point. We didn't generate a corpse! Happy us, fantastic. Stop watching the video at this point, right? Nothing to share. No, I have something to show you here. But the reason why I have something to show you here is because what if I were to ask the question of you? We're going to go real Veritasium here. What if I were to cast Corpse Explosion and then change my gear? What do you think would happen? Should it apply damage equal to the weapon that I had when I used it? Well, let's go ahead and take a look there. I'll cast Corpse Explosion, currently doing 2,000 damage. Let me put on this other random weapon. And you'll notice that the damage value didn't change at all. That's actually good. And that's why this is a terrible form of snapshotting. We'll get to that in just a quick second. What if I were to do this, cast Corpse Explosion, and then swap over to Black River? What do you think is going to happen here? Did you see that? Did you see the corpse that got created? Did you see the fact that we just generated a corpse? Now, if I were to put on this 2-handed weapon again and again and again and generate a corpse via Decompose and then cast Corpse Explosion, I would never make a corpse because I don't have Hued Flesh. But the moment that I put on Black River, perfect timing. There's no editing here. That was perfect timing. We generate corpses, and why is that? Well, it's because Black River gives us ranks of Hued Flesh. Now here's the even wilder part. You notice how I could almost demand that this happens? I can almost just make it happen on will. What if I were to tell you that goes even further than that, and that my helmet that gives me lucky hit chance, my gloves that give me lucky hit chance, my amulet, and my ring, that all give me lucky hit chance? Well, what if I were to tell you that if I were to cast Corpse Explosion, then put on Black River, and then very slowly add on all of my lucky hit chance, very often by the end of the time that I cast Black River, and sadly it didn't work there, let's just do it again for posterity. If I were to make a corpse, I were to Corpse Explosion, put on Black River, and then put on all my lucky hit chance. What if I were to tell you that by adding on lucky hit chance to my gear, after adding on Black River to my gear, not only am I increasing the likelihood that this lucky hit chance thing works, but what this basically means is that I could wear an entire piece of gear or an entire loadout of gear whose whole purpose is to, I don't know, get the strongest possible Ultimate Shadow Blood Wave, like putting Ultimate Shadow onto a two-hander, giving me a base damage scaler of 254,000 damage, and then choose to swap out all the gear that I was wearing that may be Empowered Blood Wave, and instead swap over to things like Lucky Hit Chance, or perhaps even Critical Strike Chance if we're talking about a damage over time ability that could actually crit, or things that modify how much damage I do when I do vulnerable damage. And then if vulnerable damage were to be applied after that damage over time were to happen, it would then read that stat as well. Wouldn't that be absolutely bananas? Would that not be just like heinous levels of micromanaging and snapshotting that you absolutely don't want to do in this game? Well, you're correct, and that's exactly what happens. I have recently discovered, while testing something completely different, has nothing to do with this at all. I was just trying to make sure that Black River actually dealt the damage that said that it did, because I got a couple different instances of people saying like, hey, Black River might not scale as well as we think it does. Luckily, it totally does. This works 100% exactly like you expect it to. You get the exact multiplier that you expect it to, but it's good to retest stuff. But while doing that, and while swapping out my gear, I noticed this very weird little interaction with Hued Flesh, and I set out to prove it. And I'm so glad that I was able to just do it in real time, but it begs the question, what could you do if you're in a content type? So the open world, Helltide, Nightmare Dungeons, things like, again, the Tormented Bosses, level 200 version of bosses, Echo of Lilith. Maybe you're a character that has a lot of interesting multipliers for applying a bleed effect, but then you were to swap out to a bunch of gear that says increase your chances of critting or increase your crit damage or something like that. What if you could swap out all of your gear after doing a very long damage over time effect or sustained effect on a target, and be able to benefit from a complete separate type of gear that has completely different stats that empower different parts of your build? The game would get kind of wonky very quickly. Now again, like I said in the beginning, not to make any of this clickbait, I can't currently think of a way of breaking this, mostly because the Necromancer doesn't have that many like super long effects that they can apply to our targets. Most of our damage over time abilities all occur in the 3 to 6 second range. So something like Ultimate Shadow occurs over 4 seconds, our Corpse Explosion occurs over 6 seconds, Blight occurs over 6 seconds. Something interesting like Shadow Blood Wave with Tidal Aspect, which is the thing that I'm most excited to try to mess around with, says that if you were to cast Blood Wave, it were to cast 3 times. And then again, if I were to just like swap on a different thing or even swap over to Azure Wrath here, I could then trigger the lucky hit abilities of completely different effects. But I wanted to get this out to people because I'm actually more so interested in figuring out what we can break with it right now so that I can go report this to the developers. I don't believe that they had any intention of us being able to like micromanage swap our gear for individual stats for things like crit chance and lucky hit chance for damage over time abilities, to be able to like incorporate like super powering a move again by using like Ultimate Shadow onto a two-handed weapon that has a base damage of 254,000, so that when I cast my Ultimate Shadow here, I have this huge damage boost, and then I swap over to something like Black River, and then I can use that in between and basically like swap my weapon just to cast my nuke and then swap the weapon again for the rest of the damage output, right? That's like one of the things that I think is most abusable by this, is just by like swapping your weapon to cast a very long cooldown, very strong ability, and while it's on cooldown, swap out to something much more versatile or utility based, or that allows you to apply more damage in the short gain, and then whenever you have your big nuke, you swap back over to it. I'm really concerned that people like the Barbarian or the Druid or even the Sorceress maybe should be able to abuse this in the most ways, shape, and forms, because the Barbarian obviously has the most weapons, right? So they can literally swap out like 4 different just pure stat stick weapons, apply a massive bleed thing, and maybe that's doing lucky hit chance, and they swap over to a bunch of unique weapons that then have different abilities to use in between that. Or maybe something like the Sorceress, where you would summon all of your Hydras and have all of your summon abilities going, and then you swap out to a different amulet or weapon and then use that to trigger a bunch of different abilities, etc., etc. Now, luckily, we can't do this in the pit, which is arguably the most important piece of content that now exists in the game. But that doesn't stop, one, the developers from releasing more content there. You can actually swap out your skills, your gear, you can swap out your masteries, you can swap out your Paragon, etc. And also in different ways where even these same things can be abused. Let me know down in the comments. Let me know anything that you can think of, anything that you could come across, anything that you could test with this, any weird interactions or cool combinations that you can do. Because let's just say the devs say like, nah, man, if you could figure it out, you get it. Like, GG, you came up with a cool thing. I'd like to find out ways of like min-maxing the output of builds. Maybe there's some speed farming techs here. Maybe there's some ways of zerging down tormented bosses without having to use stuff like the Holy Bolt Elixir, which isn't going to be here next season. But let me know. I'd love to hear from you. If you have never seen anything like this before, if you're brand new to the channel, if I just keep coming up in your algorithm, go ahead and let me know just by subscribing to the channel. It would help me out a ton. We are just on the cusp of hitting 50,000 subscribers. That is a huge milestone for the channel. We were like hard stuck at 42,000 for probably like the past 6 or 7 months, and we just really weren't seeing any growth. But luckily, the game is in the hands of more people. More people are excited to play it. And if you are just now coming across my content and you don't want to miss out on anything like this, go ahead and click that button. You're not going to regret it, I promise you. But as always, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it inspires you to find some interesting ways of breaking the game that you didn't think previously. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.